Good evening, everybody, and thank you for that introduction. The hope is that, as was rightly pointed out, we couldn't fit in 60 plus singers and instrumentalists this evening, but we thought we would enjoy some of the music as it sounds on the recording, and alongside that, it's an opportunity for Ed and me and for all of us to have a chat and find out a little bit more about the compositional process, how we got to this release, and lift the veil slightly on what it is to be a composer. So shall we just go straight in with the big question? Tell us about your route to composing. You are still a performing practical musician. You're a very skilled and experienced keyboard player, but tell us a little bit about your musical background and training and how you've ended up composing.
I took the kind of classic route of chorister, then music scholarship, then organ scholar, and then slightly bizarrely did a master's in environmental policy and went completely sideways after a couple of years as a teacher. I'm quite well practiced at this because it's hard to explain, but then after a couple of years as a teacher, I came back into music and went to Guildhall to study piano accompaniment. And when I was there, I remember looking at a song by a well-known composer and thinking, I think I could do this. And I just started to write. And bizarrely, as it often goes, when you find the right thing to be doing, doors seem to start to open. And I never set out to be a composer, but it just kind of acquired a bit of momentum of its own, I think. And here we are. I was still a bit hesitant of the label, but Mike, we had a coffee in the Barbican when I handed Mike some scores and said, I would quite like to write this big piece. And
a few years ago now. So Ed and I were on each other's radars. We were. I also came from a background of being an organ scholar. We were both at Cambridge, but at different times. I tell people we were there at the same time because it makes me sound younger than I actually am. But we had a similar background, and so we had lots of people in common, and we had a coffee whenever it was a few years ago, and you showed me some of your scores and I said this is great music, and we'll talk a bit later about the premiere and how this big piece came into existence and how that was then the catalyst for this recording. But what resonated with me at that stage was wearing my hat as founder and conductor of London Choral Symphonia is we always our big mantra is performing music that's voices and instruments. We've always felt that there are lots of fantastic chamber choirs out there, there are lots of fantastic orchestras out there, but relatively few groups, entirely professional, who are offering something in that middle space that is always voices and instruments. There's quite a lot of repertoire within that often gets overlooked by the much bigger groups because it's chamber size, or that may be too big and too costly for the smaller a cappella groups to mount. And so that's the space that LCS tries to occupy, and we look at repertoire by well-known composers that may not be so well-known, so slightly more obscure works by well-known names, but also we're very keen to pioneer, discover, champion the best new music as well. And Ed, I think, very much fits into that latter category, mostly by the fact you're still alive compared to lots of the other people. But your music really spoke to me and to all of us who are planning stuff with LCS as being a perfect fit for this kind of voices and instruments model. It's probably time to start listening to something now we've talked about it enough. We're going to go straight in with one of the movements from this big piece that forms the cornerstone of the whole album, Out of Eden. And this piece actually existed before you then conceived this much bigger piece. So while I battle my iPhone to try and get the right track of, do you want to explain to everybody what we're going to hear, this short extract? And
so we're going to hear the second movement of Out of Eden, which is called Silent Spring, after the famous Rachel Carson book. And I had conceived of this idea. This piece was written 6 years ago, just as a duet between piano and electronics. I found this recording of the last Kauai o'o, so the last male of a species, an endling I think they're called, singing for a mate. And I thought that this was such an evocative idea that I would write something to fill in the gaps. The o'o sings this very characteristic those are the two bits of its theme. And the piece has always gone down really well with people. And in its first iteration, just keyboard and electronics, it finished with a quotation from William Byrd. And I always had the sense that maybe one day the piece could kind of open out more broadly. And this bird call forms a leitmotif that runs throughout the whole piece, kind of emblematic of extinction. So we're going to listen to the end of the bird singing, moving into a kind of meditation on its song with the violin. That moment there where there's after the bird has finished singing, there's then a bit of British hedgerow bird song that is slowly getting quieter as everything else is rising around it. And the idea was that when the violin suddenly is marooned on that top note, that you realise there's then silence underneath, that the bird song has disappeared, and then it goes into the William Byrd.
So that small extract became one of the movements of this much bigger piece. So talk to us a little bit about how you conceived and under what labels. I lead you on to your comment about, is this a requiem, is it lamentations?
It's definitely not a requiem. We've got to head that off.
The premiere took place as part of the Easter Festival at Smith Square, the venue formerly known as St John Smith Square, in 2025. So there's something of a remit, given that it was part of an Easter festival. Yeah. So there is a religious slant to it. Sure. But tell us a little bit about what this work became and how we might categorise it.
It's a bit problematic. Neither of us quite know what to call it. It's probably an oratorio or maybe a cantata, something like that. But the idea started as a requiem, and then I thought, number one, it's a very hackneyed idea to write a requiem for the natural world, and number two, it's pretty unhelpful because the natural world is still present and not dead, and it's not about that one bird. That one bird stands for something else. And I remember singing the Tallis Lamentations in Holy Week, the year previous to the premiere, and thinking, okay, this is a much better text. It's much more psychologically interesting. And so I then thought it was going to be a set of lamentations for a bit, and then I thought I'm going to go a bit grander than this, a bit bolder. And so there's text drawn from all over the Bible. The Lamentations is Jeremiah, and in the end I actually found Jeremiah was kind of too self-pitying, and I wanted a text that was a little bit tougher, that contained some sense of we have brought this upon ourselves. So there's a lament for what we've done, but there's also a recognition in the fourth movement in particular that we're all implicated in this. None of us is separate from it. and we are witnessing the impact of what we've done, and so it then changed really from a set of lamentations into a bit more like a kind of psychological drama or something. There's a big journey down into the Miserere, which is the kind of darkest movement and the movement in which there's not much hope, and then up and out towards the end. That's how I conceived of it, as a bit like a kind of bridge or something. And I wrote each movement like I could see what I wanted each one to achieve.
So we're going to have a listen to a small excerpt from the Miserere now. So just give us a bit of context with, you've already touched on the fact that that's the kind of lowest in terms of the most emotionally dark moment in the piece. What's the text? What sort of,
so it
where
opens,
are we in the journey?
Yeah, it opens with this quotation from Revelations, and I behold a white horse, and he that sat on him was called Death. And there's this sense of a kind of like an echoing absence of all the species that have gone extinct as we've climbed up onto the stage. And then I came up with this idea. I really wanted it to be participatory. So I came up with this idea of everybody in the audience intoning the word Miserere, have mercy, on an F, and trying to build a climax around that. And that was a really interesting kind of technical challenge of like, could you make a sense of a developing climax when you were pinned in place by the audience singing this word? And in the end, actually, I set the choir free. Mike and I experimented a bit with this, and the organ holds the pitches, the chords, in this repeating sequence, and the choir are just improvising around it. And we played around quite a lot, and we actually said, go big, go crazy. And it creates this really amazing effect. This is the bit you'll hear, of the voices like a kind of dark cloud of sound with the music building. I really loved it, and I didn't really write it. So
Here we go.
because you can feel that, you feel the whole thing kind of bulging and straining like it, and everybody's struggling to stay in time with each other. You hear it in the recording, and I actually like that sense of the thing like right at the edge, and then everybody snaps into place on a bar line when the violin comes in, and it still kind of sends shivers down my spine, but I didn't really create it. I just sort of like made a framework for it, and then we pushed the singers. They were a bit uncomfortable, weren't they?
Yeah, I think that being given a blank few bars, musicians are so indoctrinated into, here's your music, this is what you perform, play, sing, that suddenly giving everybody free rein to go mad. It did take a few goes of just saying to people, go crazy and see what happens.
Do more.
And you're right, the effect is absolutely amazing, and the way it's been recorded, I think, is down to the engineers and the producers, really captures all of that, which is great. There are lots of other really weird and wonderful effects that you've employed throughout the rest of that piece. Tell us about a few more of them. I know them, but you should tell these people about some of the other more unusual things that you did.
I was very conscious, writing in this age, I'm conscious of everybody's attention spans, and I really wanted the message of the piece to come across, and it's a short piece. Mike said very clearly, no more than 40 minutes, I think, was the hard limit. And so I wanted to make it so that there was no moment that people could switch off. So there's always something coming at you from another angle. There are various bits of electronic recording. There's the bird, there's a wind effect. There's lots of kind of creative use of percussion, and I looked quite a lot into how to use the tam-tam. And there are things like there's a coin scraping down the edge. The tam-tam is like the big gong. We had a huge one, actually probably too big, because it obliterated everything at the premiere at certain moments. There's a recording, the place where I wrote Silent Spring is the house of some friends of mine, and at the bottom of their valley is a lovely river. And at the end of the piece, when we're kind of coming up and out into the final movement, which is all about hope for the future, there's this recurrent metaphor through the whole piece of that curse of God, dust thou art and unto dust shalt thou return. And I found an alternative metaphor. Oh, I should actually leave talking about this until a little bit later, but
tell us about the effects that we're going to hear in the next extract.
Yes, I'll just finish the thought, which is that there's a recording of this particular stream that comes in at the end of the sixth movement, which is another lovely moment, I think. In the next extract, in this movement, the Trisagion, we were experimenting. We used piano resonances to give a kind of ethereal effect to the singers. You won't actually hear it in this bit of the extract, I think. But if you listen later, there's this very otherworldly effect. And that was made using chords on the piano where we'd taken the attack away and just used the audio tail of the chord. So there's all sorts of clever stuff under the bonnet that was really fun.
Here we are. It's probably a good point for me to say, on top of Ed explaining all these amazing devices, that what sounds like an absolutely monumental and enormous piece of music, which it is in many ways, you've actually unbelievably skillfully created with relatively small forces. There's a fairly large choir, and the choir parts are split, but on top of that there are three soloists. You heard Katie Braid, mezzo-soprano, tenor and a baritone solo, but then on top of that there's an organ, a piano, some percussion and a solo violin, and that's it. And it has this amazing soundscape where I think you make it sound like a symphony orchestra plus. And I assume that it's largely because of your knowledge and expertise as an organist that you can use that instrument so cleverly and make it, just give it a background effect, make it front and center for those big epic moments, and actually you just get a lot of bang for your buck on top of all those clever effects that you've used. And I think you can hear with those sorts of climaxes, you wouldn't be surprised if there were 100 people all playing instruments at that point, but it's a remarkable achievement.
In the end, I think you just need something that can attack and something that can sustain. That's basically, you need those two things.